First of all, what I like to do is, because I know I'm speaking to leaders, is that I want you to relax. There's a tendency in any particular setting that you have is that we have something to prove and we fear we have something to lose. And even in this learning environment, as we spend time in the entire afternoon together, we're kind of concerned about the impression management that we make, or the modern term optics. So what I'd like to do is just talk to you. I have spent the last 30 years working everywhere from West Point to the Navy SEALs to Fortune 100 companies, meeting with CEOs and leaders around the world. I have spent time dealing with aspects of Columbine in Oklahoma City and Ground Zero with the Federal Executive Board, dealing with the school district and Governor Owens, dealing with the shootings that have happened there. I have spent time with organizations around the world, and one of the things that always draws me too is the concept of leadership. And so I've done an extensive amount of study around the world dealing with leaders in the field of theology, psychology, government, for-profits and non-profits organizations. And so what I'd like to do just for a very few minutes is just kind of talk to you about something that has defined my life. And I know it has defined your life. It's three little words. The last time I was here was about a year ago, and I asked you a question, if you remember, a year ago in terms of what's the one important thing you must do as a leader. And there was a great discussion among the groups to decide what is that one most important thing I do as a leader. When I'm teaching MBA students, they obviously have this standard question they always ask. And I said at that particular time that for me, the most important thing I do in life is to be a bearer of hope into a whole world of work dealing with learned helplessness. And so my role is to inspire and equip and encourage others so they can have a different vision of what the world of work can be and how you can maximize people and planet, and also profit. So just very briefly, I just want to share with you these three little words that actually has defined me. Two of which have become very popular by books, and one that we haven't heard of yet, but I'm sure someone's going to write it if I don't. Someone else first. Perhaps you will. The first word that's very important if you want to define your life as a leader is that you have to have an understanding of the word why. The word why. It creates meaning in your word. For example, why are you engaged in business? Why is that important to you? And there's been a great deal of study for many times dealing in the world from 1980s to our present time when they're asked that question. For example, some of you know Milton Friedman, right? The one who won the Nobel Prize in Economic Sciences, the one who was the kind of economic czar for President Ronald Reagan at the time. Milton Friedman would say that the sole purpose of a business, in fact, the only social responsibility a business has, is to maximize their profit. And so for years, corporations, still to this day, are focusing upon maximizing their profit, but you and I have seen that has failed in many ways. For example, you take Ford Motor Company dealing with the Pinto issue that happened about a decade ago, how the actuaries made a decision that it would actually be cheaper to deal with wrongful death lawsuits than it would be actually to change a $128 part. And so people lost their lives. You can be reminded of the fact of Volkswagen just recently. Remember that? The sole responsibility of a business at that point is to maximize profitability, and Volkswagen made some significant decisions. Or you look at British Petroleum, who had a philosophy of dealing with the problem that the best way to handle their particular problem after the hurricanes and the situations in New Orleans was to blame other organizations. And so over a period of time, we began to realize that the sole purpose of a business to maximize profitability is not the best way of doing that. And so Milton Friedman, when he talks about that responsibility, I don't think he's right. And so Ted Levitt and Peter Drucker, one of my heroes, began to talk about in terms of moving from the idea of being a profit-driven organization to now moving to a customer-driven organization. And as a result, we've seen very successful organizations do that. Hobby Lobby. We've seen Southwest Airlines. We've seen now many of the Fortune 20 companies now being more service-driven than they are product-driven. Levitt would say that without customers, no amount of engineering wizardry, clever financing, or operation expertise can keep a company going. This is exactly what Peter Drucker said, that the sole purpose of a business is to secure and keep your customer. So as a result of that particular venue, we see customers, or we see companies being driven by supporting the customer. But over the last 10 years, there's been a new focus in terms of the business that I want to share with you, and that really has to do with purpose-driven leadership. It has been said by Stephen Phelps that by 2020, 80% of organizations that people want to deal with in the new workforce are not interested in you if you're profit-driven or if you're customer-driven, but that you are actually purpose-driven. That we're able to actually address the question why. So this comedian, Michael, that's out here actually travels around the world speaking about about things that are funny. And what he talked about is many times people ask him what he does, and he says he's a comedian, but that's not why he does it. He actually is a comedian because he wants to change the world. And in the middle of his hour-and-a-half presentation, what he ends up doing in the presentation, he has breakout sessions or a pause where he talks to the audience. And it just turns out to be funny because people are funny. So he picked out this man, this African-American individual, a big husky individual with a great deal of strength. And he says, "What do you do, sir?" And he says, "I'm a music teacher." And he says, "Well, can you sing?" And the guy said, "Yes." And he said, "Sing whatever you want." And the guy sings Amazing Grace. You know that old hymn, right? And so he sang Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. And he did it beautifully. And then he said, "Now I want you to sing it with a reason. I want you to sing it that you lived in the hood and your mother was shot and you have dealt with crime all your life and you are in pain and you're in heartache. Now I want you to sing Amazing Grace." And then he sang it. And he began to sing it in such a way that you could hear the tears and the pain and the heartache and the celebration. You could hear the anguish from his mother. You could hear the shots that were being fired. And he sang the very same words. So much so that the entire crowd stood up. And the reason they stood up and gave an ovation was because they heard the why. If you and I want to change our organizations, if we want to make a difference in our organizations, don't tell them about the what first. You have to create the narrative of the why. John Carter, in his excellent book dealing with corporate culture and performance, says, "Purposeful, value-driven companies overperform their counterparts in stock prices by a factor of 12. When we're dealing with the millennial population, what we need to realize is the why is fundamentally more important. And so the why is more important. The power of the why is more important than the how or the what. In fact, if you can't create that narrative, your employees will always choose superficial over substance, rumor over truth, self-centeredness over sacrifice. That's not the only word to change a culture, because you need to have another word I'd like to share with you very briefly. And that's the word and versus or. We used to live in a society where dogma was really important, where authority figures were really important, where inclusiveness was significant in the business world. In fact, many times people would turn to a lot of companies that had the name General in front of it. And now today we live in a world of specialization. We live in a world that we have to change our language to the point that we don't say we're all about efficiency or about dignity. What we are about is efficiency and dignity. We're not about in terms of just having this as a good idea because someone in positional leadership has given it, and we're also about the employees that we want to help. We have and. Think of the great leaders. Nelson Mandela, for example. Nelson Mandela changed South Africa not because he brought in the blacks to try to change that culture. He changed South Africa because he brought in the blacks and the whites to work together for a common goal, and the country changed. Mahatma Gandhi changed India because not only did he deal with his own particular religious persuasions, but he brought the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Muslims together and brought the and. Martin Luther King would have just had a movement that was dying, but he brought in the and in that particular language. One of the things that will define us as leaders in the next 21st century is for us to have the ability to use and. To say, who are the other voices we have? 50 years ago, it was males. Now we're beginning to realize it's important to have other voices called males and what? Females. Or we begin to see different colors of skin, and we begin to understand the aspect of and in terms of the emotion that begins. A great leader is always committed to the word and. In fact, the and part is very important. Hewitt has written a great book that deals about our culture and understanding. It's called Heed the Call, Heed Your Call. And he says many times in organizations we don't understand the importance of and so what we do is we have right-brained people that have this highly creative idea to start this organization with a great deal of entrepreneurship, a great deal of skill. And what they do is begin it, but they begin to realize as their company grows, they need people that have analytics, people that have left brain skills. And what unfortunately happens over a period of time is that the left brain begins to dominate the right brain to those that have the gift of imagination and innovation. Creativity begin to be swallowed up by those who have the rules and the rituals and the background. So much so that we see many organizations move from inspiration to institutionalism until they have to reframe their creativity. So the first word's why, and the second word's and. The third word is with. That is, as I've studied leadership, whether they're political leaders or whether they're corporate leaders, they've understood the why and they've understood in terms of the and. But one of the things they understood is the word with. Let me give you an example, and I'm going to change the story just in case you may know somebody, because you guys are very influential people. I serve on the board of directors of many organizations, and a couple of which are nonprofit organizations who are always trying to secure money. And one of these individuals constantly was giving money to this particular organization. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars, but eventually what happened is that the head honcho of this nonprofit organization and this particular head honcho of this corporation that gave this money had a squabble about something. Quite frankly, I don't know who was right. Maybe they both were wrong. But I found in the midst of that squabbling they had, this particular person no longer gave the money to that organization. And it had devastating results. Because that person was giving to, not with. If that particular person that gave all that money actually lived with those people that he was helping, actually was taking care of those people and heard their stories, if it was, for example, the Ronald McDonald House and that person who gave all that money to Ronald McDonald, it's not, but actually was there with the parents, was there seeing that child, was there spending time with them to hear their particular story, I don't care how much the hassle was. That person that gave that particular money would have still gave the money because he understood the concept of with, right? As opposed to to. When we're looking in society in the future, if we're going to make long-lasting changes and truly be a mentor, we have to have this mentality of avoiding the to. That's what colonialism colonialism started in Africa. We need to begin to with. The with listens. That's one of the things wonderful about Jerry Rollins and this whole organization here is because you're with. Spending time mentoring too, mentoring with each other, as opposed to just giving head knowledge to one another. Are you feeling me? So what's a good example for that as I close? I told my grandson, I have 3 grandchildren, and I told my grandson I'm going to talk about 3 little words that make us an awakened leader. And he goes, Papa, you are? And I said, yeah, do you know what those 3 little words were? And it comes to me, I think so. And I said, you do? He said, yeah, I love you. I go, man, those are really good words. And I said, maybe that's what I'm saying, that we're really caring about one another. And then I thought, how do you know, Michael, that Papa loves you? And he says, I know that you love me because you love being with me. Did you hear that? You have employees that you pay, and I know you do all your sacrifices and all the works that you have. I know you have forecasting and strategy and innovation and those type of things that are there. But if you want a workforce that has ownership, that are committed to the same goals that you are, don't talk to them. Be with them. Those are the 3 little words that kind of define my life. Why, and with. Thank you so much.